Welcome to episode 5 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and joining me are the hosts of the Oil Country podcast, Jon from Edmonton and Kyle from Montreal. How's it going, guys?
Good. How are you doing, Eric?
Fantastic, man. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys on. We've been talking about this for a while, so it's good that we could finally do it.
Yeah, it's been in the works for a little bit. So nice that we, schedules matched up and we can get on the roll with you here.
Absolutely. I think we were talking about this even back in September, so it's long overdue at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right there.
You found us early, man. You came out of nowhere. Like, we're a pretty new podcast, right? So we were pretty honored when you reached out to us.
Yeah, well, I've been working the overnight shift for a while at my place of work, and I was just looking for some Oiler-related content to listen to and kind of discovered you guys. So it's kind of funny how you find these different podcasts, but no, I really like what you guys have going on.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Cool. Well, before we dive into any Oilers-related talk, I know we have plenty of topics to get into. I think a good place to start is just, how do you guys know each other?
I'll let Kyle take this one. Go ahead, Kyle.
Me and Jon originally actually got into an argument on Reddit. Me personally, I'm from Alberta as well. I'm from Canmore, just outside of Calgary there. And I just randomly was talking to him in the Oilers subreddit, and he thought I was being a jerk to him, so he got kind of upset with me. But I was like, dude, I'm not arguing you. I'm just, having a conversation. And because we kind of got along after that, we were like, oh, okay, no, you're not being a jerk here. You're just like a bro kind of trying to talk it out. We just kind of had a relationship, that we maintained over like a year or so, I'd say, Jon. Hey, just going back and forth.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he made a post one time saying that he'd like to start an Oilers podcast and any kind of input that people had or whatnot. So I private messaged him and said, just, hey, I'm still interested if you want to do that with me, and yeah, kind of hit it off from there.
Which is definitely kind of an atypical way. Sorry, Eric, go ahead there.
No. I was just going to say, have you guys actually ever met then?
We haven't. We're planning on going to a game at the end of February when Kyle's back in Alberta here, and we're going to be going to the Jets game. We both actually have trips.
Oh.
I'm heading to Vegas the week before, and Kyle's heading to California to see 2 Oilers games the week before, and then we're going to meet back up in Alberta and meet. So it is a little bit of an atypical, podcast relationship, but so far so good. And I mean, it's been a good duo. So.
That's awesome. Well, I'm expecting to be at that game as well. We're actually hosting the Oilers Live Cup at the Edmonton Community Arena earlier that day. We do it a couple times a year. We play a hockey game for charity. And after that, most of the people who are playing will be going to the Oilers Jets game. I think you're talking about February 29th.
That's correct, yeah.
So it'd be awesome even if I can run into you guys there.
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be wicked. We can all meet in person for the first time.
I think we'll definitely keep in touch for that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, for sure, guys. So, Jon, you grew up in Edmonton, and Kyle, you in Canmore. Did you guys have a chance to go to many Oilers games at Northlands growing up? It might have been a little harder for you, Kyle, living a little further away.
Well, I grew up in Red Deer, actually, but luckily, Oilers, yeah, no, all good. My Oilers kind of runs in my family a little bit. My grandparents had season tickets right up until a couple of years ago, right through the 80s. So I did get to see quite a few games. I remember my grandpa taking me to my first game, probably 2000, 2001, and going with my dad quite a bit. So I'd say on average, there's some dead years there, but I'd probably go to at least 2 or 3, upwards of 6 or 7 games. And now I've been in Edmonton for 8 years. So usually catch quite a few games, and I did growing up as well.
My family themselves, like they're from Saskatchewan, but my mom's side is from Edmonton, so that's where the team passion came from, I guess. But for getting there, I obviously seen them play more at the Saddledome in Calgary. But me and my brother and my dad would usually make a trip up and watch a game or two at least every season. So I definitely been to Northlands there, but I have not been to Rogers Place yet. So I'm looking forward to that trip in February to finally check out the new arena.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, I live in Saskatoon, so I'm about a 5-hour drive away. Where is your family from in Saskatchewan, actually, if you don't mind?
Regina, just a couple hours south. Yeah. So a little further, but not too bad, actually. One thing I think is always so interesting to find out with all my guests is just how they became Oiler fans.
And I've talked about it before. The reason I'm an Oilers fan is because of Wayne Gretzky. Even though I didn't get to enjoy his prime years, it just learning about the game and about what he did for Edmonton made me a fan. And then, of course, growing up, Ryan Smith was, my favorite guy. I'd just like to know, who are some of your favorite players as kids?
Sean, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Growing up, I'd say George Laraque, Ryan Smith as well. Like you said, Eric was definitely I was a big fan of him as well. But just the way George has played, how physical he was and how excited he was when he finally got a goal jumping into the corner was
George
something that
beauty.
I kind of attached with there. Sorry?
George is a beauty. Sorry.
No, all good. Yeah, he is. He's a great guy. I know, Kyle, you've met him in Montreal, have you not?
I met him one time at a Laval Rockets game, and actually, just since we're speaking that, when you do come out here for, we're hoping that he's going to attend the draft here in June since it's in Montreal. But you can schedule a meeting to go meet Laraque at his hockey card shop, which is just north of me here, probably about 45 minutes north. So we'll do that.
Nice. A childhood dream come true for me, for sure. I did meet him once when I was a little kid, just getting a quick autograph in line, but nothing, on a personal level, being able to actually chat with him or anything.
I think I remember you guys talking about Laraque on a previous podcast episode too. So that you might have told that story before. That's sparking something in my memory.
I think I did, yeah.
So he owns his own card shop too? I didn't know that. I knew he hosted a radio show.
Yeah, he does a radio show. He's also at the Rockets games all the time. He, at least when I was there, he was singing karaoke on the Jumbotron, during one of the intermissions, and then came out and was doing shootout goals on one of the goaltenders during the second one. Just kind of makes it a little bit more lively having him there. He's such an entertaining guy. But yeah, he's a part owner. I think there's 3 of them that own it up in Laval as their card shop, but it's pretty well renowned. It has good reviews and stuff from what I've heard. I've actually never been there, but yeah, hopefully me and John will check it out when we're there.
That's surprising because Kyle's a pretty huge hockey card collector, so he's always sending me these pictures. I'm surprised you've never gone down there, Kyle.
It's just a trip, that's all. It'd be hour and a half, 2 hours round trip. Yeah. But
nice. Yeah, I'm a big hockey card guy too. Growing up especially, you'd get all the McDonald's ones, and I had cards passed down to me from cousins and friends from the 80s and stuff, and sort of started making my own collection as I got older. But I found that I haven't collected as much in recent years. The Tim Hortons ones come out every year now, and I think for maybe 1 or 2 years I was getting them, but I just haven't kept up with it as much. Is it still something that you like to do? Do you still add to your collection?
I spend a dangerous amount of money on cardboard.
Oh, do you?
It's unhealthy, actually. Yeah, I probably spent $4,000 last year, but I probably made about $10,000 worth of cards.
That's actually why I'm heading down in June. It's not for the draft. We're having an intervention with his girlfriend, so we'll see how that
goes.
Oh, okay. No, but there's different styles now. This isn't what this needs to be about, right? But the ones I buy are more 4 or 5 cards a pack for $150 to $250 type of deal.
Okay, nice. I know there's that really there's a top of the line set. I think it's called the Cup.
Yeah, the Cup is ridiculous, dude. It just came out ago. Yeah.
And it's just as the cards are even more valuable in the case if you never open it, right?
Well, it depends, right? If you were to pull a Sidney Crosby year, right? When he came into the league, an out of 99 rookie of his from that set just sold for $81,000 Canadian.
Wow.
A McDavid one is going for 27 right now, and that to buy that would be an investment, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a different one. Yeah.
My parents' next door neighbor when I was growing up, he owned a hockey collectibles shop in a mall near our house, and he had all these valuable cards that I would go look at, Gordie Howe ones, Bobby Orr ones, and he just said the value of these are only going to go up. So it's kind of you said it is an investment. But for the diehard collectors and anyone who has the money to spend, I think it's something that they're probably pretty cool and happy to show off.
Yeah, I just like it myself, honestly, for that. It's just it adds to my hockey room, right? It's just a little pieces of memorabilia and autographs and stuff. It's I don't really collect it for the monetary value, really. I do it because it's just cool little pieces for my room.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of what I got into it too. Most of the Oilers' top players, I have their rookie cards, but I don't really consider that I'll ever sell them. I mean, if I ever have kids someday, pass them down to them or something like that. But it's like you said, yeah, it's not for the monetary value.
Yeah. What?
And are you into collecting as well, John?
Sorry, no, I've been a little quiet here. Not so much hockey cards. I did a little bit when I was younger, but I'm more of a jersey guy. I've kind of slowly been starting working on my my Oilers jersey collection with autographs, but it's still a long ways to go, and the framing on that is ridiculously expensive. So I'm just waiting to save up enough dollars in the old piggy bank there to get my McDavid home jersey from 2 seasons ago framed, but that's kind of more what I'm into as far as memorabilia goes anyways.
Yeah, and I'd admit that I'm more of a jersey guy than a card guy, but still love the hockey cards as well. I only have a couple autographed ones. I have my Gretzky and my Smith, which are my 2 most valuable ones, and those are the signed ones. But, I think everyone's got like probably a few other ones in their closet that they'll wear around, but not those ones. The signed ones will never leave the closet. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way, and it's tough because you want to show them off, right? And that's why I'm so eager to get it into a frame in my man cave in the basement. But it is tough, like you get those. You have your prized possession in a jersey, and it just sits away in a closet with a bag over it or a suit cover over it, just collecting dust. So. Man, it is a little tricky in that way.
You'd be so upset if you took it to a game and some jerk off spilt a beer all over you, though, man. Like,
absolutely.
There's no way
that I would wear it to a game.
Yeah. I don't even like wearing my good jerseys to games anyway. I just always feel like, someone's either going to spill beer on it or I'll spill something on it. Or, I have sort of my older ones that are kind of beat up that I'll wear around, but some of my good ones, like they're almost just like collector's items to me, like you guys were talking about for your cards and your jerseys. That's just how I kind of see it.
Absolutely. No, I'm the same way. And like I've got a blank jersey that I think I got as a promo through Atco when I signed up for utilities a couple of years ago, and just their orange jersey when the orange was in there after our playoff series there, playoff year there. And that's all I wear to games, because it's like, those ones with names on them, especially the ones with autographs on them, it'd be an absolute shame to get spilled on. Or, I mean, I have a couple beers and then spill on it myself. You never know what happens.
Yeah, I was about to say, I get way too trashed at games. I definitely spill mustard from a pretzel all over me, man.
Breaking the ice here.
Yeah, no, for sure. So just moving into some Oiler talk now. We're 23 games into the season. By the time this podcast goes online, they'll have played their game against the Kings tonight. But I'd like to hear both your opinions on what you think of the team's first quarter of the season and an outlook for the rest of the year.
Well, it's hard not to be pretty impressed. It's been a great start to the year, and there's obviously still some areas for improvement. I mean, depth scoring has been one of those things that's kind of turned into an echo chamber in oil country here, but I'm absolutely thrilled. I mean, the goaltending has been a huge positive surprise. Ethan Bear's emergence has been great. And I mean, we've got two superstars that are on pace for over 150 points. So when those guys, it's great fun to watch that style of hockey. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like the last 2 years as an Oilers fan, there's been some really frustrating moments, and I'm sure some frustrating moments will come again, and I'm sure they'll happen this year. But this has been one of the most enjoyable seasons for me to watch anyways. I'm sure Kyle agrees. And all these little surprises coming up, and obviously the team success. So as far as where the team's going, I think it would be, I don't want to say a failure, but a big disappointment if this team manages to not make the playoffs. So at bare minimum, I think you've got to be looking at a wild card spot down the stretch here in the last 3 quarters of the season, in my opinion. Anything less than that would be a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when we were first kind of talking about this season, right, us, like most other people, weren't predicting much from this team this year. It was kind of looked at as a 1 year kind of rebound in between Chiarelli and into Holland's kind of real tenure starting next season, right? But what's happened with this team is outstanding. Like all the kind of low points that we thought, like the goaltending, we knew our defense was going to be better this year, but they've really shone through, right? Like they've been bright spots, and those bottom 6 signings, those 1 year deals that he put out, and brought some competition into this camp. They've show that they want to be there and they want to stay in the NHL, and they're playing like it. Unfortunately, they haven't really got the scoring until the last couple games here, but we should be proud of the boys. Like it's incredible what they've done so far. And as far as John saying, like it's been one of the greatest seasons to watch so far for him, at least this far into the season. Like I'll totally agree on that, and it only makes it better that the Flames are playing like absolute garbage, and Toronto just had to fire their coach. So like I'm having an absolute blast this season, honestly. Yeah.
And it's made it a lot easier. Sorry, if I can add one more thing. It's made it a lot easier for us because we really didn't want to, in our pilot season of this podcast, we really didn't want to be talking about Lafreniere in November. And that's obviously gone that way. So it's made it a lot easier on us and made the podcast a lot more fun as well.
There's been far too many seasons over the past decade where draft experts are coming on Edmonton radio in November. And as much as I love hearing about the upcoming prospects and as much as I'm a follower of the draft, I probably wouldn't mind waiting until May or even June to have the experts come on to start talking about who the Oilers might be in line to pick with their first selection, as opposed to hearing it 15 games into the season. It's a little more encouraging anyway. So the fact that we're talking about playoffs, I mean, I think that's just such a great sign. Jason Greger had an article out the other day at Oilers Nation just saying like the Oilers are a playoff team now. And, bold claims like that are starting to be made. There's still, 3/4 of the season to be played. But there's that old adage, that, if you're in the playoff race by American Thanksgiving, you have like an 80% chance of getting in. Do you guys buy into that at all?
Oh man, I set a post on Reddit actually when that was kind of coming out, and I reacted by saying like I treated this sorry, my God, I can't talk right now. I treated high school the same way. I would always try really hard at the beginning because it made it easier to coast if I needed to further on, right? If I started really poorly at the beginning of the season, I'd be trying to catch up the entire time. So I do believe like having that success early on in the season like made it easier for us when we had that kind of 2-week lackluster period, and for getting us into the playoffs, like where we're at right now. Of course, having like a strong November, December is going to obviously put us in that position where we're a quarter of the points we had last season at a quarter of the way or more. Sorry, my God, I can't talk right now. I'm sorry, dude. I don't know where my point is.
It's all good.
No,
like having a strong start. Sorry, like gets you better off into the playoffs. So, like, yeah, obviously. Yeah.
All I've got to say about Gregor's post is I hope there's no jinx there, because it is one thing, especially with our fan base. And I mean, me and Kyle are diehard fans as a part of that fan base as well. But there's going to be a point in this season where the Oilers might, I don't want to jinx the injury bug here. I'm knocking on wood, but maybe have a 3, 4, 5 game stretch where they're not playing great hockey. Every team goes into slumps like that. And I think that's the biggest thing is like right now, like Kyle said, if that or when that eventually happens, it's not going to be so much the sky is falling, even though we always joke about Oilers PTSD. So I think for some of our fans, it will still be that case. But, trying to look at it from a unbiased kind of logical perspective, I think obviously them setting themselves up early and doing their work early, as my old basketball coach used to say, is going to make that eventual slump not near as big of a nail in the coffin as it has been most of the last 10 years or more.
For sure. And if we look at how many points they probably need to get in, you see in recent years it takes roughly around 93 points to lock down a wild card spot. They're already at 31 as of now. So that's another 62 points to get in with 59 games to play. So they really only have to play a little better than 500 hockey for the rest of the season to get in. I think that for fans, we can kind of look at that and kind of start counting down the magic number, but the players need to be very focused and not, get too full of themselves and think that they're, a lock to get in, because all it takes is you get some cockiness in your game. Like we saw against San Jose a week ago, they were coming off of a couple big wins and all of a sudden you get blown out. So they can't believe their own hype. What do you guys think?
I think you hit it right on the head there. I mean, the team's got to take it one game at a time. I know that's such a huge hockey cliche, but we've seen it with the Oilers a lot in the past where they'll, play good hockey against the good teams and then they come into a weaker team. And tonight's game, like you mentioned, against the Kings is a prime example of that, where you're coming into a building where the team's been struggling on the ice, and you can't play down to their level. Like, they need to come out 100% and make it undoubtedly a win for the Oilers. And that's, I think, the only thing that makes me somewhat worried about this team is you still have seen that. But on the flip side, every single team in the NHL has games where they get beat by a lesser team, right? Like, parity's so tight in this league. You see the Washingtons and Pittsburghs and Chicago's back when they were really good. They get upset by teams on occasion. So it's just about bouncing back. But I completely agree with you. Like, they can't start doing that countdown whatsoever. They need to just take it a game at a time, as much as it is a cliche.
This team has really, like you said, like rebounding too. Every time we have gotten blown out, we have rebounded in a huge way the next game, right? Like, they don't seem to be the team of years past where they don't have that compete level, or they'll go down by 2 goals and they'll stop competing. The game's over in the first period. Like, they seem to keep trying all the time. It's a nice change from this team. There's an actual care for the game, it seems.
Definitely. And, I think a lot of the pundits out there and the experts were saying, well, the Oilers' hot start was mainly due to a soft schedule in October. And, they're going to come back down to earth once the schedule starts to really ramp up in November. But here we are in a tough month for them. And they're 4-1-1 in their last 6 games and first place in the division. So I think that we're starting to see that this is the real thing now. They're not pretenders anymore. They're starting to look like a team that can get in. And if they can make it through this tough month, when they get into December, they have a lot of home games. And in March down the stretch, when they're really going to be looking to lock down a playoff spot, they have a bunch of home games there too. So I think the schedule is actually going to set up pretty well for them if they can kind of survive this next little stretch where they're playing Vegas and Arizona this weekend, and then you get a tough Colorado game, and then a home and home with Vancouver next weekend. So if you get through this stretch with where you're above 500, I think they're going to be in a pretty good position.
I'd agree that they definitely had like an easier schedule to start the year, and I think that was huge to us, right? If we would have started off and played a murderer's row and not gotten some confidence with our fairly new team, like a bunch of new players in the bottom 6, I think we would have had a lot rougher go than where we're at right now. That kind of easier scheduling and letting our team gel and get some confidence in them is what helping us fight right now through these tough weeks in November here.
I couldn't agree with more with what Kyle said there. I think that first 10 games or so, obviously starting, I think, what was it, 7-1-1 or 7-0-1. Not off the top of my head there, sorry guys, but that was a huge confidence builder. And it wasn't that we played, just a string of bad teams, but it was enough that you played a couple middle of the pack teams with some lower end teams that you're expecting to be towards that bottom of the standings. And like you said, Eric, I couldn't agree more. Like, if they can get through this next, the rest of this 6 game road trip, they're going to be in a very good position. If they're playing 500 hockey through there, I see no reason, unless there's a huge catastrophic collapse, why this isn't a playoff team come spring.
Definitely. And I think another thing that people are often pointing to is that it's mainly a 2-man show in oil country, that Draisaitl and McDavid are really driving the bus. And that's fair. I want to talk about them in a minute. But what can you say about the other guys who have stepped up? The Ethan Bears emerging, the Mikko Koskinens, the James Neal, Zach Kassian. I mean, this team isn't just a 2-man team as much as some of the people in the mainstream want you to believe it is.
No, not at all. And I mean, you start at the top of the lineup. Obviously, we're going to kind of pass over Draisaitl and McDavid, like you said. But I mean, they finally found that third partner that all signs are showing towards Zach Kassian being able to be that first line player, not maybe stereotypically on most teams by any means, but playing with that high end of talent. He knows how to play with those guys. I think the other thing is you've seen a big Oscar Klefbom being healthy. That's been huge. Knock on wood again. But like you said, James Neal, I mean, we can get into that trade if you like, but that was a huge win. And I think with, like Kyle said, with Holland, not being able to really fully implement his retooling based off the cap space he was left with, but with the ability to bring James Neal in and his ability to be bought out if he does decline in the future years, and to move Lucic out, which obviously wasn't working. I mean, that was a huge win for the whole first year in itself. Even if the Oilers don't make the playoffs, that trade right there sets themselves up so much better for the future. But like you said as well, I mean, Ethan Bear, me and Kyle absolutely fangirl over this guy pretty much every episode. Like I think we maybe had 2 episodes this year where we haven't talked about Ethan Bear, or at least brought him up.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that we thought highly of, but weren't expecting this type of showing, right? He was a little bit injured last year. And obviously, I mean, it's been well documented. He fully committed himself to the game in the offseason, put on good weight, and got back in a really good game shape. And man, is that kid composed. And it's fun to watch. I mean, he's been a huge addition to our team, especially when you look at a defensive core that isn't really known for their puck moving ability. And you've got a guy in there that's not only a right shot, but is very composed under pressure and able to move that puck up to our skill players. So those have all been huge. I mean, you can't, obviously, like you said, everybody kind of mentions that McDavid and Draisaitl just dragging this team along. And I mean, it's easy to argue that when they're on pace for 150 points each, but I think it gets overshadowed a lot where we've got 7 players right now on pace for approximately 40 points or more on the season, and Nurse, Nuge, Cassian, Neal, Klefbom, and obviously the McDry duo. So we don't have great secondary scoring, but there's some secondary support there. It's not just the Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid show night in and night out.
It's more that our bottom 6 is now actually able to like cycle a puck and pin a team in their own end and tire them out by making them play defense rather than it only being the McDavid Draisaitl line that does that, right? Like every team for the most part has stars on it, right? But a team that wins has a whole team participate in that win, and we're finally getting that from our entire roster. They're starting to put in. So yeah, it's been a great year from all of those additional role players so far, and hopefully it continues. Yeah,
I think I absolutely agree. I mean, you look at any team, they're, like you said, they're going to have their star players who are the top producers, but you want to have that solid contribution throughout the lineup. The Oilers aren't on that level yet, but at the same time, there's only so many goals to go around, right? You're not going to get 3 bottom 6 goals a game plus 3 from McDavid and Draisaitl. They're not going to score 6 every game. It's just not going to happen. But the way I look at it, as long as McDavid and Draisaitl are carrying the bus offensively most nights, the other guys just have to be able to play even hockey and not get in the minuses. So if Dave Tippett can coach those guys to play a solid defensive style when they're on the ice, and then let his 2 Lamborghinis just go when they're on the ice, they should be able to win most games, because when McDavid and Draisaitl are out there, the Oilers are the best team in the NHL. And when they're not on the ice, they're maybe average to below average, right? So it's just a matter of finding a way for those guys to contribute in other ways other than on the score sheet.
It contributed in other ways, and also like playing more minutes. We've noticed that like as Connor's gone super cyan, right? Like they were playing 24 minutes a game to start the year, and now that's kind of dropped to around 18, 19 minutes a game. So those, bottom 6 players playing more important minutes, more of those players filling in on the penalty kill, right, or allowing Connor and Leon to have more energy and be able to put more out there when they are on the ice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, like you said there, Eric, I think Tippett coaching those guys up and Holland also bringing those defensive guys like the Archibalds in has really opened up where, like Kyle said, you have those, that minute ratio is now dropping as the team's starting to kind of gel together, right? You saw those 24, 25, 26 minute nights, like Kyle mentioned, and that was starting to get really worrisome. But I think the other thing, as far as that duo, we've been asked a lot when we do interviews with some of our Hockey Podcast Network guys, is that production sustainable? And I mean, I don't know if they'll eclipse that 150 point mark, but it really seems like with the emergence of Zach Kassian on that right wing, these guys are showing no signs of slowing down. So like you said, if you can get that support and more or less just not get scored on, it doesn't overly matter if those guys are scoring 1, 2, 3 goals a night. It'll happen every once in a while. You saw Kara has 3 in his last 2. Haas had a little bit of a run there with goals in back-to-back games, or I think 2 in 3 games. But you get a little bit of chipping in, and that takes you a long ways, right? You don't need that third and fourth line putting up 30, 40 points a year.
Absolutely. And, as much as we loved the lunch bucket, blue collar Oilers of the late 90s, early 2000s, I think those teams are always going to have a special place in the heart of Oiler fans. Having true superstars in town is just such a treat. And as much as the fans and the media out east might not like that a small frozen Western Canadian town like Edmonton has the 2 best offensive players in the game, it's just amazing for Edmonton to have these 2 guys playing in our city and to be members of the Edmonton Oilers. It's akin to Gretzky and Messier back in the 80s almost, or at least the closest thing our city has ever seen to that. What can you guys just say about what we've seen through our 2 superstars early on this season?
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, we've been watching McDavid for going on 5 years now, and I'm just going to ignore Draisaitl just for a second, but I'll get back to him. And I mean, pretty much every game he makes a play that still makes my jaw drop and just go, wow. Like, he is so fast, and that puck moving ability, and he's starting to shoot more. I mean, definitely in my lifetime, he's the most impressive offensive player in the world and that I've seen. So it's absolutely remarkable. And like you said, back to those kind of middle 2000s and 90s teams where you had those blue collar guys that just outwork teams, and teams like Arizona are doing that now, right? Where they've got some high talent players and they're a very well built roster, but they don't have that legit superstar like we do. And I think those teams really embodied the Edmonton and Northern Alberta lifestyle and work life, which was great. But man, it is insanely fun to watch these 2, like you said, the probably the 2 best offensive players in the game, definitely the best duo in the game right now, without a doubt. You can't argue against that. And I mean, the emergence of Leon Draisaitl, like, I remember, I try not to question draft decisions because I'm well aware that as fans, we maybe have 20 or 30% of the information that these GMs have, but I wasn't stoked on the Leon Draisaitl draft pick, and I'll be the first one to admit that I was absolutely wrong, and I couldn't be happier that I was. But he's emerged into the epitome of what a power forward is in today's game, where he can skate, he can pass, he can play defense, he can outmuscle guys. I mean, the dude is just freakishly strong, and to have both those guys on the same team and on the ice together most of the time, I can't say enough. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible to watch them night in and night out.
I don't even know how I'm supposed to add to that. That's a perfect description.
Sorry, I went ranty a little bit there. Eric got me fired up.
No, all good, man. I mean, I agree. Other than, like, I originally did like Draisaitl when we drafted him, but I know that there was other prospects that were available there too that we could have gone with. But obviously it was the right choice, and yeah, his growth since he's came into the league is just insane, man. Absolutely phenomenal. He's a top 5 player in the league now. And that's even changed over the past month, right? Like, people were putting him kind of in the top 15 there before, but he is truly elite.
Yeah. He's a number 1 center on pretty much every other team in the NHL.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was such a joke that the NHL Network ranked Marner, Matthews, and Tavares all ahead of him. And I know I'm just picking on the Leafs here. I mean, there were a lot of players ahead of him who I thought Draisaitl should have been listed before, but it's just like, come on, to have he's coming off a 50-goal, 100-point season, and you rank him like the 16th best player in the NHL. That's just people out east, and where all the the top hockey media centers are, and it's just they don't watch him. I did a podcast with a guy in Philadelphia, great guy, great podcast, but it's just they don't see enough of our guys to really appreciate how good they are. And they still, a lot of people out, still have the opinion that Sidney Crosby is the best player in the world. And I think a lot of that has to do with a track record. We've watched Crosby for 15 years. He's a household name across Canada. So it's just, your brain just instantly goes to, Crosby's automatically the best player. He's won all this stuff. But just because he's had the better, longer career doesn't mean he's the best player in 2019. I've been a believer that McDavid's been the best player in the NHL since 2017. I don't think he's just becoming it now. Since the first year he won the Art Ross Trophy, I thought he was better than Crosby. Did you guys see that too, or do you think that he has just recently passed him?
No, I've been thinking that at least for a good year, if not, 2 years, like yourself. You can't take away from Crosby's game, and I know you're not, right? Like he's obviously had success, and he's one of the greatest two-way players to ever play the game. He's incredible. But yeah, Connor on ice is by far the most phenomenal player in the world. Like that's bar none. I think that's agreed upon by a lot of people now, but like as you said, there's still people that need their minds to be changed. But yeah, I do think it's just people haven't seen them enough, especially now with like how the Western Conference only plays one game in the Eastern Conference and vice versa, right? Per year on each team's home ice, so they don't get to see that player very much, and when they do, that one game is kind of their impression of that player, it seems. So I don't know, but yeah, obviously, McDavid is the greatest player in the world right now. I don't even think that's questionable. Yeah.
No, unsurprisingly, I completely agree with you guys. I mean, I've thought that for at least from the start of last season, after the playoff year there. And I mean, it's one of those things where I think I understand to a point some of the arguments with Crosby, because I think there are certain things that Crosby does do better than McDavid. But I think the things that McDavid does better, it's a bigger gap. Where Crosby's definitely the more complete player. I'll concede that. But as far as McDavid's offensive ability and his game-breaking speed, Crosby isn't even close in that sense. I mean, does Crosby have a better backhand? Yeah, probably. Is he a better defensive player? Yeah, he probably is. But as far as the positives that McDavid has, and I mean, at the end of the day, hockey is a game like all sports where you've got to outscore the other team. And if I'm taking a guy, even without even factoring in their age, if I'm taking a guy for one season to build a team around, I'm taking McDavid over everyone else in the league, and I'm not even thinking twice about it.
Do you think there's a greater appreciation for two-way talents today? Because one thing I often hear is, Crosby's the best two-way player in the game, so he's the best all-around player. Yeah, that means he's the best player. But back in the 80s when Gretzky and Lemieux were dominating, their game was focused very heavily on offense. I don't think anyone's going to come out and say Gretzky was a defensive stalwart. Like, he was an absolute offensive machine, the greatest offensive talent the game's ever seen. So if we're saying that, you have to be good at both ends of the ice to be considered the best player in the game, I just don't know when that came into the hockey mentality. That, I mean, yes, obviously a coach is going to love you more if you're great at both ends of the ice.
Right.
But I just think that just because Crosby has a stronger all-around game, I don't think that makes him better than McDavid. You know what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. And I think it's a product of that kind of 90s and 2000s hockey where scoring drastically declined after the 80s. And I think obviously once teams started scoring less, it became more important because you knew you weren't going to get those 6, 7, 8 goals a night. It became so much more important to not get scored on. So you saw players emerge that had that gritty two-way game, and they were kind of more respected. But I think that's kind of where it came in. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it in today's age. You can look back to the 90s and thousands, and yeah, were some of those players valued a little higher for their era? Sure. And I have no problem with that. But in today's age, I mean, you're seeing scoring continue to rise. And it's not like McDavid's an absolute liability on the defensive end by any means either, right? Like, he definitely has his moments. Can he improve on it? Sure. But you're also kind of putting him up, not you specifically, but everyone's kind of putting him on this pedestal where it's like, hey, if you want to be the best in the game, you've got to be the best at defense, which in my opinion, I disagree with. Like, he has such a bigger gap on the offensive side that he can be an average or above average defender and still be by and large that best player in the league.
I'd agree to a point though. Like, you can't discredit defensive responsibility and being talented at defense, right? Like, obviously it doesn't make him any less of a player because his offensive capabilities are just so far ahead of everybody else, right? But I mean, Crosby as a two-way player, like, it is important. I think people are starting to notice the defensive side of the game more recently as stats are getting more involved in the game, and people are kind of reading into the game a bit more. And instead of just being somebody who puts points on the board through assists and goals, like, you can be quite a talented player for your career by being a Selke candidate, right? But I definitely don't think that because he's not the greatest two-way player in the game doesn't make him not the greatest player in the game right now.
Eric, if I can add on to something there, you had mentioned a little bit before about ranking Draisaitl and some guys in the East. I always like to look at it where, that like EA NHL, where if you're doing a fantasy draft, but you're only doing it for one season, so contracts, age, none of that matters. When I'm looking at Draisaitl, I think the only two players that I can really argue as far as forwards go, where I would consider taking them, is obviously McDavid, and then I think McKinnon's up there as well. But you can argue Crosby, obviously, because you're only getting him for 1 year, but that's the way I kind of like to try and get an unbiased perspective. And I mean, I'm still biased a little bit because we're obviously Oilers fans, but I think Draisaitl's got to be in that conversation for top three. Like, it's really hard to, I mean, maybe Crosby, but after that list gets pretty thin of guys I would even consider taking over Draisaitl.
Absolutely. Everyone who follows hockey has a degree of bias to their watching the. It's just have a slight bias towards them, if not a major in the rest of the league. And that's where I kind of want to finish on for the McDavid-Draisaitl conversation here. Obviously, 44 and 43 points respectively between the two of them. What kind of totals do you think that we can see from these guys? Like, it's going to be very hard for Draisaitl to maintain his almost 2 points per game pace for the rest of the year. But when I look at McDavid, I think that this is he has a real chance to maybe get 140 points here, which almost seems unthinkable in today's NHL. Just wanted to quickly get a quick point prediction from each of you for the two guys.
Well, Eric, funnily enough, we do a segment on our show at the end of every episode called Tell Me How You Really Feel. And we'll ask each other a question, and it's the other person doesn't know, and they're just answering off the top of their head, right? So a couple weeks ago, John actually asked me this question, and this was probably 3 weeks into the season, John, something like that, 2 weeks in.
Yeah, I believe so.
And just if you could keep up that pace, and I was kind of projecting, like, I think what's reasonable is 135, and like the upper end of, I don't know it's possible is 140. And now, like, I would even up that, like, I think 140 is totally attainable. Like, I could see it happening with the way our bottom six and our defense and goaltending has been playing. If we can keep allowing Connor and Draisaitl to get out there and have open ice by not having to always play hard minutes, then I think it's totally possible to sustain their output right now.
As far as this year, I mean, I completely agree. Like, I think I wouldn't even be shocked to see them eclipse the 150 mark. I think as far as if I was making a point prediction, I'm pretty comfortable in that high 130s, low 140s range. I don't think they'll keep up quite that pace you've seen, a couple weeks ago as 160. Now we're dropping, and like you mentioned, it's tough to keep up that 2 points a game pace. But I could definitely see them settling in around that 140 number as well. And as far as career-wise, I mean, Draisaitl is really tough to predict, but I think McDavid, prime, where we have a much more balanced team with a legit second line, I see no reason why McDavid in his prime seasons won't be eclipsing 170, to be honest.
And see, that's ridiculous, because even the only two players who've ever done it in the history of the game are Gretzky and Lemieux. So for him to get up there, that would just be unthinkable, especially in today's era. So I think a lot of Oilers fans would be pretty psyched if that ended up coming to fruition.
It's a little bit out there, but I mean, I honestly, until I'm proven otherwise, I'm still going to keep believing on that one.
No, I hope it happens. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
absolutely.
Even for him to get 160 just so that he could say he averaged 2 points a game for a season. I mean, these guys, it's still so early, but they are both, McDavid especially, but Draisaitl, if he continues playing at this pace, are on track for Hall of Fame careers. Like this is absolutely just phenomenal what we've seen from these two. And I just pulled the numbers while you were talking, and for Connor to get to 140 points this year, he needs 97 points in the last 59 games. So that's about 1.64 points per game. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think he could do it.
So what you're saying is we need to start the countdown from 97, which coincidence, I think not on that one.
Yeah.
Coincidentally works in with his number exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a good place for us to go now, shifting away, we've talked about how important having Clefbaum is being back. Missing him the last few years has really hurt the Oilers. Having Ethan Bear just fall into their lap, like he's found money, having a top four defenseman just materialize out of nowhere for a team that was so desperate for one and wasn't able to bring one in the summer. And you look at what James Neal's done. We've talked about all these guys who've helped and contributed in other ways. I think that we'd be remiss without talking about Mikko Koskinen. And when you look at the 2016-17 season when Cam Talbot got the Oilers back into the playoffs for the first time in 11 years, his solid goaltending was arguably just as important as McDavid's amazing season. What can you guys say about Mikko Koskinen's just great first 12 games that he's played in the time that he's split with Mike Smith, and where he's clearly proven to be the better of the two goalies thus far?
Well, for one, I'm super, super happy for him. After that contract was given out, he definitely was not a very popular player in our fan base. And to see him prove that last Chiarelli gamble has so far worked out, and like you said, we're only 12 games in, or 12 games played for him, but it's been absolutely huge. Like what you said with Talbot, I couldn't agree more. That year that they made the playoffs, he was definitely, if not our MVP, he was number 2 after McDavid that year. And Mikko's been absolutely so solid back there. I think I can only really think of one game where he had a couple soft goals, but even then it wasn't to the degree of, he lost us that game, right? We were still right within punching distance. And sorry, I'm kind of blanking on what game that was, but I think the biggest thing is not only are we getting that goaltending, but as he's continuing to play these games, he's going to continue to get more confident. And me and Kyle always joke that goaltending is absolutely voodoo, where you can have absolutely Vezina candidates that all of a sudden drop off the next year and struggle extremely. So I'm really glad to see that he's kind of stringing some games together, but you also can't discount that I think the team in front of him on average is playing a lot better. And not to take anything away from Mikko whatsoever, but I think the thing last year when fans kind of started to doubt Mikko, because early on in the season, he was playing pretty well, right? Talbot struggled a little bit, and then Mikko came in, and we, similar to what you said about Bear, thought he was kind of found money there in the month of November and December. And then as we started to play him more, he played more games than he'd ever played in the KHL before. Talbot gets traded, and I think he had a string of 21 starts in a row, and you see that play start to kind of drop off. So I think adding Mike Smith and having a 1A, 1B tandem, although I agree with you that Koskinen has been the better goaltender, I think Mike has also pushed Koskinen and kind of made that competition, just like they did in the bottom 6, they also did that to the goaltending. But to answer your question, I mean, Koskinen's been absolutely solid. He's not necessarily out there absolutely stealing games, but for the vast majority of games, he's giving this team a very good chance to win. And at the end of the day, that's all you can ask out of your goaltender.
I think we shouldn't forget to mention too, like he came from the KHL as well, right? And most players and goaltenders need a little transition period as they come over, right? The ice is bigger, there's less traffic in front of the net. So when he came over here, and he did succeed at first, but then had the slump. And I agree with John there, right? He was overplayed, and the competition wasn't happening behind him in net, which I think is very important to him. But yeah, he's played out of his mind, and we're very lucky to have him at the position he's in right now.
Well, I mean, you look at last season, Koskinen was the clear-cut backup coming into Cam Talbot, but he started the year 11-3-1, and that excellent start, I think, is what earned him that contract. But it was after that where the quality of his game fell out the more he played. You talked about that long stretch of games that he was playing, and it's weird. At first, if I remember, Cam Talbot started playing all the games right after Mikko signed in. I think that was because they were trying to audition him for other teams that might want to trade.
Right.
Yeah. But it just made little sense. Like, you sign this guy to this contract and you're sitting him on the bench. And then you start giving him this really heavy workload that he's not used to. And all of a sudden he starts to fade down the stretch. And you look at this year, maybe Mike Smith, even though he hasn't been as great, Mike Smith's had some great games too. Like, I'm not going to discount that. He had that game in Pittsburgh where he's absolutely stole it for him. And he's had other games where he's looked really solid, but just overall he hasn't been as good. But the fact that they've got a guy who can kind of split starts with Koskinen and take some of the workload off, that might be just as valuable as just have a veteran puck stopper in there who can come in and kind of give some relief to the Oilers' starting goalie, if we can call Koskinen that.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing there too is it seems like, by my eye anyways, Koskinen's gotten a lot more aggressive playing the puck, which you can probably attribute to, I mean, you have Mike Smith in practice every day. I would assume, I don't think that's too much of a stretch to say he's probably picked some things up there, right?
Oh, absolutely. You're going to learn from your teammates, right? I'm sure every player who practices against Connor McDavid gets better just because of him. And that's the same thing they said about Gretzky in the 80s. He helped guys like Messier become the player they were. And, Draisaitl's an incredibly talented player in his own right. I'm sure that's rubbing off on him as well, having to go up against Connor and play with Connor all the time. But yeah, we've even seen Mikko handle the puck a little more. I don't think he's ever going to get to where Mike Smith's at, but he's starting to show maybe a little more confidence even doing that.
Yeah, no, it's been nice to see him like go out and reach into the end of the trapezoid or right out in front in the corners, right, and actually throw it out to the defense instead of just sitting back and letting the defense get pinned behind the goal line. So it's huge. Like that movement of the puck has helped our defense out this year a lot. So it's nice to see both goaltenders pitching in on that.
It'll be interesting one of the things I've kind of thought, and I asked Kyle about this on one of our episodes actually, but if this team makes the playoffs, and not trying to get too ahead of ourselves here, but it's one of those things where you do kind of have to have a guy, right? Where if the guy that you choose at the start of the playoffs isn't playing up to snuff, you obviously have that option to switch. But that's the one thing they've been still operating on 2-2 or occasionally 1-1 with backup or back-to-backs, But that is one thing. I mean, I agree with you though, Eric. I think Mikko right now, if you had to choose one to play the rest of the games, I think Mikko's the guy. But it does seem like Tippett has a lot of confidence in Smith from when they used to have that coach. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Back in Arizona there.
I mean, you look even in post-game press conferences, I think there's been a couple times where if Mikko, let in a couple soft ones, like you said, he's going to be like, yeah, Mikko's got to have one of those. But, Mike Smith gets lit up and Tippett, because he's had him in Dallas and in Phoenix, he's like, we had to be better in front of him. It's just his guy. He knows him more, and I think you're going to have that comfortability with a player.
Right, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Mikko also have Tippett get a little bit more comfortable with him, especially if the style of play continues. I mean, Mikko's 8-1-2 right now. Like, that's absolutely incredible.
John, to your point, you were talking about like having a guy in the playoffs. Spin Chicklets, I was listening to their podcast like last week. They mentioned about that exact situation. I forget what team they were talking about. I feel like it was Dallas, just off the top of my head, but about having like two goaltenders that you can rotate, and about how I'm throwing this out off the top of my head, so I don't remember it exactly, but they said no team has ever won the Stanley Cup that had a goaltender. I believe it was win more than 50 games, but maybe it was play more than 50 in a season. Like, you need another backup to rotate off and keep that guy healthy for when the time comes, right?
I think so. And I mean, not to traumatize the Oilers fans, but you look back to 2006 when Rolison got hurt, right? And that's something you definitely need people backup. I think it's more off the top of my head. It's tough to remember a team that, made a cup run and won a Stanley Cup, alternating two goalies or going back and forth, right? More so. Usually there's going to be one guy that gets more games. Obviously, there's occasionally, like you had the Matt Murray, Marc-Andre Fleury. That's kind of an example there, but I'd have to look at the stats there, but I'm pretty sure that they had one guy playing way more games in that situation still. Hopefully the stats don't bite me in the ass there. I could look like an absolute idiot. But
the Penguins were already trying to transition Murray into their starter by that time. And, looking back, it almost looks like they should have held on to Fleury and left Murray exposed. But, that's another story. I'll let the Penguins podcast guys dive into that. But, just to finish up here, I want to talk to you guys about your own podcast. But just the last thing on the Oilers, Adam Larsson returns to the lineup tonight.
Yeah,
he blocked a shot in the final minute of the first period of the first game, broke his fibula, and missed the following 22 games, even though he played the rest of the game except for the last 3 minutes of that game with a broken fibula. Unbelievable, the pain threshold he has. Like, just taking me back to like Jason Smith in the early 2000s, the pain threshold that he must have. But what can you guys say that he's going to bring back to the lineup playing against the Kings tonight? Are you excited to have him back? Are you not big Larsson fans? Where do you come out on him?
Oh, of course you have to be excited to get him back. He's going to help down that shutdown pairing that we used to have, right? Like, we unfortunately had Benning get injured the other night, who, although he's been kind of a, hated on player by most of the fan base and been a scapegoat for a bit of it. He has actually had quite a good season, right? So to lose him last game and then have Larsson come back in, it's huge. Without it, I guess without Benning being injured, Jones would have been sent down. So we get to have Jones up here a couple more games. But with Larsson, we get to have him tonight. He's with Manning, but I'm assuming he's probably going to be, or not with Manning, sorry, my bad, with Russell. But I'm assuming in the future, he's going to be probably back with Clef. And put Nurse and Bear on the second pairing, and we can open up some more offense from that pairing. So I think it's going to be huge having him and Klefbom back on the first line, eating up minutes, or first pairing, eating up minutes, and for the team as a whole, like it'll open up more. So.
Absolutely, and I think the tough thing with Adam Larsson, I mean, you always go back; he'll never be able to escape that trade, right? And I think he didn't really get a fair shake by a lot of fans, but I am an Adam Larsson fan. I think he plays a pretty sound defensive game. And you saw at times last year, especially when the Oilers were struggling, he was trying to add that offensive ability and, pinch down a little bit more and take the puck to the net a little bit more. But I think it'll be huge having him back. And my biggest hope for Larsson, I mean, he's had an extremely rough couple of years. Everybody knows, obviously, with losing his dad. Was that the season before last, I believe?
January 2018, I think. Yeah, so about a year and a half now. Almost 2 years.
And I mean,
ago.
that anytime you're playing any sport, or not even sports, whether that's work, your personal life, I mean, so much of that is confidence, and just your performance as a human being is based off of your self-confidence, right? And I think he's had a really tough go in that department. So really hoping he can be obviously healthy and get that confidence back in his game. But I think it's a veteran coaching move having him start out on the third pairing, right? Giving him a little bit less responsibility, letting him get back into game shape, because he's obviously been off that leg other than the last week or so of practice. And if he does well, there's nothing stopping you from moving up, right? Or moving him up the lineup. But I think for this team to have, if this team wants to win a round or two or go deeper in the playoffs, Adam Larsson is going to be a key member of that top four defense. You've got Ethan Bear that's emerged, and that's great, but we still need that. We need those two guys on the right side in our top four to play with Nurse and Klefbom and obviously hopefully stay healthy. But I'm trying not to have too high of expectations for him in his first game back tonight, but I'm absolutely stoked that he's back. I think it shows even more credit to the team too, having the record they have. And like you said, Larsson getting hurt in the very first game of the season. I mean, he might not be a superstar, but he's definitely still a key piece to this team.
Well, look at how last year, right, when Klefbom got injured, how we didn't rebound like we have when Larsson got injured here, right? This team was able to hold their own, and that was huge. Having him back now is just going to be the next step.
Oh, for sure. And, it sucks to lose Matt Benning on such a reckless play with a dirty two-hander across the side of the head by Kane that didn't get called the other night. but perfect timing with Larson coming back. And I think it's just smart for them to slot him in on the third pair. You don't want to disrupt what the guys in the top four have going on either. So good test for them tonight. You know, they've shown they can beat some really good teams in this league. Now it's time to put away a team that they should beat and, you know, get to 9 games over 500 with a win in LA tonight.
Absolutely.
So just to kind of wrap up here, I'd like to kind of find out a little more about the inspiration for you guys to start the podcast and what people can expect when they listen to your podcast on a weekly basis.
Well, I think the biggest thing is when we were getting started, or even before we were getting started, and I'm sure a lot of Oilers fans feel similarly about themselves here, but Kyle and I have always considered ourselves some of the best hockey BSers. We both love talking hockey for one, which is an absolute necessity to be a hockey podcaster, but it's just a huge passion for us. So that might not be out of the ordinary, I guess. But one of the things that I think makes our podcast a little bit more unique is we do try for the most part to have a more logical approach, right? We try and take a step back and analyze what's going on with the team. So we're not big, and we try to not be as much, like, we do have fun, but we try to not be that typical hot takes for clicks mentality that you see a lot in major media and blog media as well. And I think that does have a place in the entertainment wise, but we really like talking more like the nitty gritty of the Oilers team instead of just kind of fooling around and trying to have those crazy opinions. But I think for Kyle and I, you know, we definitely still, I hope anyways, that it does come across that we have a great time doing this with one another. So I think that's an added effect that you need to have for any podcast, right? Like, no one's going to tune in for a podcast, two guys that are like, oh yeah, hey guys, you know, Oilers game. But so yeah, that's kind of my rundown anyways. Kyle, do you have anything to add there?
No,
or disagree with?
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, yeah, I would say that we rant, we have a good time together. I know that we haven't really met in real life, right? But we usually are on Discord together and talking during every game and shooting the shit. Like, we try to keep close and try to keep a good chemistry on our podcast and pass it on to listeners, I guess. Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, I completely forgot to add, as far as what you can expect, I think one of the great things, and a lot of podcasts do this, but one of the great things with us being welcomed into the Hockey Podcast Network is Kyle and I, early on when we were trying to do game previews, which we usually end the episode with after our recaps for the last few games or the last game since our last episode. And we usually bring interviews from those podcasters on. And I know, Eric, obviously interviewing is a huge aspect of your show as well, so I'm sure you can relate to that. But I think it's great to have that perspective of having another diehard fan from the Kings on to explain the intricacies of what's going on with their team, where when me and Kyle were trying to do it, it's like, yeah, we're Oilers fans, but it's like, I don't watch the Kings, right? I watch a lot of hockey, but just as much as any other diehard hockey fan does. So we don't really have that insight. So that's something I'm really glad that we've, you know, kind of implemented on our show. You get that insight from diehard fans from those other teams.
And that's what I really appreciate, that any media outlet or podcast or anything like that who bring in someone closer to the source, like when it's on Edmonton radio and they're talking about the Raptors or the Blue Jays, that they bring in someone who follows the team on a day-to-day basis, or when the Oilers are playing the Predators or the Wild or whoever, they bring in someone who follows those teams closely, because there's nothing worse than someone who doesn't watch the team giving like a thorough breakdown of what's going on. It's like we see it in Toronto all the time when they analyze the Edmonton Oilers, and you know, it's almost to the point where you can't even watch it or listen to it because it's half the time it's not even close to accurate, media. Right? Yeah. It is, yeah. And I'm careful to criticize the media too much because I kind of want to work full time in that industry one day.
Absolutely,
I'd be careful about what I say, but yeah, I'm just. You know, you see it everywhere, I'm sure. And we probably don't paint the Toronto Maple Leafs in the right light all the time either, as much as we dislike them. But I'm sure it's going to happen in every market that you're looking at across the league. So just can you tell any of my listeners where they can find you guys and any social media that they can follow you on?
Yeah, so we are, like I mentioned before, we are on the Hockey Podcast Network. So that's the hockeypodcastnetwork.com. We are on Twitter as well at Oil Country Pod. We have a website as well that all of our episodes go on. How it works, we are censored on the Hockey Podcast Network, so we still do swear on occasion and sometimes a little bit too much, but they're bleeped. And then 24 hours after that drops, we put it on our own website, oilcountrypodcast.com, uncensored for any degens that like those that profanity. We are also on Instagram and Facebook and starting to get into YouTube a little bit, but our main contact would definitely be Twitter. And if you don't mind as well, I'd like to plug our monthly giveaway.
Plug away.
We are giving away a $50 NHL Shop gift card. This is our first month doing it, so we're starting out a little bit small, but we haven't had a ton of feedback there. So if anyone listening wants to enter into that draw, your odds of winning are actually pretty good. So how that works is we drop a code word every single episode, and then all you have to do is DM us on Twitter or message us on Facebook or DM us on Instagram with code word, and you get entered.
Perfect. And I'm just retweeting that from your site right now. So anyone,
much appreciated.
For sure. So anyone listening, go to my Twitter page and there will be a link to it there and you guys can find out more information. So please, everyone, check out the Oil Country Podcast and give Jon and Kyle all the attention they deserve. These guys are a great podcast and I really enjoy listening to it, and I really enjoy having you guys on, and hopefully we can do this again down the road, either on the 99 Forever Podcast or the Oil Country Podcast, whatever works out.
Absolutely, would love to, man. Thank you so much, Eric, for having us on.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, we really appreciate it, and we definitely love to have you on ours as well. That'll definitely be coming up. We'll leave a little bit of a gap maybe and not
yeah, you don't want to get people
overdo it, but yeah, we absolutely love to have you on, man.
For sure, and I'm sure Kyle, you're looking forward to that 10:30 Oilers start time if you're watching the game tonight.
Dude, I work at like 8 in the morning, man. But yes, I am watching it. I will be up till like tough. 2. Yeah.
He's a trooper, though.
I watch every game, no matter what time. Yeah, I'm always up late.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
We recorded last week late on one of our episodes, and I think Kyle. There was a game afterwards as well, and I think Kyle was up until like 3 a.m. So watching hockey and all that stuff. So he's a trooper.
I lived in Toronto for 10 months a couple of years ago, and yeah, it was tough. Some of when they'd play the Sharks or the Kings, the West Coast times starts just in Toronto, really late nights, especially when you had to get up early, like Kyle said. So we'll tough it through. I still have to go to work after after the game tonight, so I'm pulling the night shift again, so I'll still be up drinking a Monster Energy to keep me going. But
I was gonna say you need some energy drinks or something.
Yeah,
there for
exactly.
Sure.
that's my regular. That, and then hopefully listening to a positive post-game show on Edmonton radio after. So I want to thank you guys again so much for joining me, and like I said, let's do this again.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for having us on.
So for Jon and Kyle from the Oil Country Podcast, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever Podcast. We're out.